At 1:47 hours, at 59 degrees north in the Baltic Sea, the container ship Baltic Spirit suddenly vanished from the digital map. Its AIS signal went offline, turning 15,000 tons of steel into a silent shadow just 800 meters from Estonian territorial waters. Moments later, a supply vessel moved in and began transferring high-pressure fuel through a 12-inch line under the cover of darkness. Above them, a U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft captured the entire scene with its long-range infrared system. But then came the strange part. The crew was ordered to hold position. No interception, no direct action. They simply watched as the final cubic meters of fuel were pumped aboard, giving the ship everything it needed to move out. Why would a force as advanced as the United States allow a covert operation to unfold right in front of them? The answer was far more tense than it appeared. Below the surface, a Russian Kilo-class submarine, often called the Black Hole of the Ocean, was positioned directly beneath the supply ship. Its forward outer doors were already open, and it had been waiting in silence for anything that crossed into its path. On the surface, it looked as if Russia controlled the entire situation. But what they did not know was that the U.S. had already activated a response plan unlike anything they expected. No dramatic naval exchange, no long-range strike, no traditional show of force. The U.S. Navy was waiting for something very specific, and the answer would reveal itself in the next few minutes of this high-stakes standoff. To understand what happened, we need to go back 1 hour earlier to 047. The P-8 Poseidon's detection of the Kilo-class submarine was not luck. Before the Baltic Spirit shut down its AIS, a fiber-optic sensor grid on the seabed detected an extremely low-pressure fluctuation. It was the kind of signal produced when a diesel-electric submarine shifts into silent running mode. In response, the P-8 deployed a network of multi-static sonobuoys. These buoys work together, creating narrow digital sound beams capable of cutting through the electromagnetic interference coming from Kaliningrad. What they revealed sent shockwaves through NATO command centers. The Kilo was sitting motionless beneath the area, fully prepared and in a state of high operational readiness, with its first and second forward tubes open. At the same time, Russia released mobile acoustic decoys along the seafloor. These decoys created dozens of false signatures moving through the Gulf of Finland, making it nearly impossible to isolate the real submarine from the phantom targets surrounding it. Above the water, Russia's choice of location was just as calculated. The refueling operation was taking place exactly 800 meters from Estonian territorial waters. That distance was not random. It was close enough to use Nisar Island as a natural barrier against waves, helping stabilize the extremely sensitive, high-pressure fuel transfer. One sudden impact, one pressure leak, and 840 tons of diesel could turn the Baltic waters into a major environmental emergency. Russia was betting that NATO would not take direct action because of the environmental risk and the legal complexity of operating in international waters. From Moscow's point of view, NATO had only two options: watch from a distance or trigger a crisis. But there was a third option, and the U.S. Navy had already put it in motion. If you are ready to see how the U.S. Navy changed the entire situation without using the response everyone expected, comment USA below. At 02:15 hours, with only 25 minutes left on the countdown, the silence over the sea was broken by a short coded message from the U.S. Navy's 6th Fleet to Estonian Command. Action authorized. Move now. Immediately, the Estonian patrol boat Raju surged through the waves, heading straight toward the 800-meter boundary at full operational readiness. Above it, K-Commando helicopters descended to just 100 meters, sweeping powerful searchlights across the deck of the Baltic Spirit. A rapid boarding maneuver began in the darkness. But Russia had prepared for this exact moment. As soon as the Raju entered the 1,200-meter range, the Podlet K system aboard the Baltic Spirit shifted into focused interference mode. In an instant, the Raju's radar screens and communication channels were overwhelmed by white noise. Then the crew on the Russian vessel activated the deck-mounted water monitors. High-pressure streams blasted outward, creating a dense wall of mist and steam around the ship. That vapor screen disrupted the infrared systems on the helicopters above, turning the Baltic Spirit into a blurred silhouette in the night. For a moment, it seemed like Russia's plan had worked perfectly. They had the ship protected on the surface, the submarine hidden below, the air picture distorted, and the legal line carefully calculated. But the U.S. Navy had not been waiting because it was unsure. It had been waiting because the real move had not started yet. Below the surface, the Kilo-class submarine made its move. From one of its forward launch tubes, it released a wire-guided underwater vehicle moving at nearly 40 knots. Its ultra-thin fiber-optic tether produced no electromagnetic signature, making it almost impossible for Estonia's sensors to detect. The vehicle approached the Raju from behind and released a reinforced polymer net around its propulsion system. Within seconds, the Estonian patrol boat shuddered violently. In the engine room, the warning alarm erupted. Propeller fouled, engine overload. The 900-ton patrol vessel suddenly lost power and drifted helplessly on the dark Baltic waters, right in front of the opposing force. Russia had managed to stop NATO's intervention unit without a single detonation. As the Estonian officers tried to understand what had just happened, a new order came through from the Americans. The voice was calm, controlled, and final. "Withdraw all units! Return to base immediately!" Estonia was ordered to pull its remaining forces back toward the shoreline. High above, the American P-8 Poseidon continued circling in silence, watching everything unfold without taking direct action. To Russia, this looked like confirmation that NATO had stepped back under pressure from the submarine threat. But the silence from the Americans was not fear. It was the cover for something much larger. Every move so far had been part of a carefully prepared trap. At 0240 hours, after the Estonian patrol boat had been disabled and forced to retreat, the sea fell into an eerie silence. Moscow sent no radio messages. It maintained strict emissions control, protecting the civilian cover of the Baltic Spirit. But beneath the surface and above it, the pressure was escalating fast. From the direction of Kaliningrad, the Steregushchi-class frigate Submarines suddenly accelerated to 28 knots, heading straight toward the refueling coordinates. The ship kept its navigation lights off and issued no radio warning. Its only message came through its targeting radar, which locked directly onto the American P-8 Poseidon. Inside the aircraft, the radar warning indicator flashed continuously across the combat display. It was a silent message. Any direct move from the air would be answered immediately. At the same time, two Su-30SM fighters emerged from behind Nisar Island. They dropped to just 30 meters above the sea and rushed toward the NATO formation at extreme low altitude. The shockwaves rolled across the water like thunder, shaking the Estonian sailors and adding intense psychological pressure. Russia was now using a mobile area denial tactic. It placed military pressure around the covert refueling operation while still leaving Moscow room to claim it was only a routine exercise in international waters. On the deck of the Baltic Spirit, the fuel transfer entered its final 15 minutes. To protect the vessel from long-range tracking systems, Russia activated another layer of deception. Autonomous buoys carrying corner reflectors were released into the water. Almost instantly, NATO radar screens filled with dozens of identical signatures, spreading outward like a school of fish. The real Baltic Spirit disappeared inside a maze of false targets. For conventional tracking systems, finding the actual cargo ship had become nearly impossible. With only 15 minutes remaining, Russia believed the operation was already won. To them, the U.S. Navy's silence meant defeat. The P-8 was still circling at a distance, and no direct response had come. But what Russia did not realize was that its own aggressive posture had just handed the Americans exactly what they needed. By activating the full targeting radar system aboard the Steregushchi, Russia had exposed the final pieces of data the U.S. had been waiting for. The weak point in the entire defense network was now stored inside the American aircraft's processor. The Silent Hammer protocol, a quiet response designed to disable the enemy's core systems without a conventional exchange, was finally beginning to reveal itself. At 0252 hours, while the Steregushchi frigate remained focused on maintaining its lock on the P-8 Poseidon, the U.S. Navy began the real operation. It did not aim at the hull. It did not aim at the deck systems. It aimed at the data stream Russia was relying on. The entire interference pattern from the Podlet K system, along with its frequency-hopping behavior, had now been mapped. The P-8 transmitted an ultra-short synchronization pulse, precisely timed to match the rhythm of the Podlet K system aboard the Baltic Spirit. The first signs of disruption appeared inside the Russian formation's positioning network. Using a hidden weakness in the link between the Steregushchi frigate and the Baltic Spirit, the U.S. Navy introduced a high-level signal deception. Quietly, the system began shifting Russia's GLONASS positioning data by only a few milliseconds. It was too small to notice at first. But in a network that depended on perfect timing, a few milliseconds were enough to change everything. As a result, the Steregushchi's autopilot believed the frigate was 2 nautical miles away from the Baltic Spirit. In reality, the two vessels were moving directly toward each other. Russia's own show of force had unintentionally opened an electronic corridor, giving the U.S. a path into the heart of the navigation system without leaving a visible trace. At the same time, beneath the surface, the USS New Jersey SSN 796 began its part of the operation. It released a specialized acoustic device designed to imitate the control pattern used by Russia's fiber-optic underwater systems. The Russian drones suddenly received a false return command. Their polymer nets retracted, the drones turned back, and within moments they wrapped around the propulsion system of the hidden Kilo-class submarine. The real turning point, however, came during the fuel transfer. The U.S. Navy directed an infrared laser at the pressure sensor on the 12-inch fuel line. The beam did not ignite anything and did not damage the pipe. Instead, it created a controlled thermal effect that made the Baltic Spirit's pump system believe pressure inside the line was rising to a dangerous level. Russia's own emergency safety protocol reacted instantly. To prevent an environmental crisis, the entire fuel transfer system locked itself down with an automatic shutdown command. In just 120 seconds, the U.S. Navy turned every Russian advantage into a liability without a conventional exchange. The Kilo-class submarine was trapped by its own underwater system. The Submarine frigate lost confidence in its navigation data, and the Baltic Spirit's refueling process was stopped by its own safety controls. Russia entered a state of complete technical paralysis, while its screens still showed that everything was operating normally. That was the opening the U.S. had been waiting for. The final enforcement phase could now begin, and Russia had almost nothing left to block it. At 03:04 hours, a collision alarm erupted aboard the frigate Submarines. The corrupted positioning data had pushed the vessel toward the Baltic Spirit at 28 knots. The distance between them had fallen to only 300 meters. The Russian captain had no choice. He cut the automated systems and forced the ship into a sharp manual turn. The frigate leaned heavily to one side, tilting almost 30 degrees as it barely avoided impact with the cargo vessel. Under the sea, the Kilo-class submarine was no longer hidden. Its propulsion system was tangled by its own drones, and the strain from the overloaded engines created a loud sonar signature across the Gulf of Finland. The USS New Jersey moved into position above it and transmitted a clear sonar message, ordering the submarine to surface to prevent a serious underwater incident. Meanwhile, near the Baltic Spirit, American unmanned underwater vehicles approached the hull. Using ultrasonic sensors, they scanned the containers and streamed images of restricted military components over an open international frequency. Russia's ability to deny the operation collapsed in real time. The Su-30SM fighters dropped low, attempting to disrupt the evidence-gathering effort, but NATO F-35B aircraft immediately brought them under radar tracking. For several tense seconds, two major powers stood face-to-face above a floating fuel hazard in the Baltic Sea. Russia now had only two choices: escalate and risk losing control of the situation, or step back and lose the shipment. At 03:15 hours, the Kilo-class submarine surfaced with propulsion failure, exposing its hidden role in protecting the Baltic Spirit. The escort frigate Submarines was forced to pull back 1 nautical mile. With the path finally clear, Estonian special forces moved toward the Baltic Spirit under U.S. Navy protection. No conventional exchange took place, no dramatic strike was needed. Russia's entire defensive structure, from long-range pressure tactics to encrypted electronic systems, had been neutralized by the Silent Hammer Protocol. The operation ended as the first light of dawn spread across the Baltic. Russian forces withdrew toward Kaliningrad, later explaining the incident as a technical malfunction. The Baltic Spirit was escorted to Tallinn, where 40 containers of restricted military components were seized. The U.S. Navy quietly recovered its electronic warfare equipment and issued no public victory statement. The Shadow Fleet did not disappear that morning, but its operating methods, signal patterns, and digital weak points had been exposed. The confrontation did not end through force. It ended with the United States proving that control of the battlefield no longer depends only on ships, aircraft, or visible power. Sometimes the side that says the least is the one rewriting every system from the inside. And as the Baltic returned to silence, a new calm settled over the region. But beneath that calm, both sides were already preparing for the next hidden confrontation, far to the north under the ice of the Arctic.